Hey, it's Mariana, and thank you for joining me on the Commitment to Growth podcast, a platform dedicated to helping you build resilience for lifelong momentum. We chat about healing, mindset development, and how to live in your authentic truth, because often it's not our problems that cause our dissatisfaction, but everything around them that we haven't yet addressed. Thank you for joining me today, and let's get into this week's conversation. Hello. Welcome to the Commitment to Growth podcast, everyone. It is your host, Mariana, here, and founder of Commitment to Growth Resilience Coaching, where I am dedicated to helping women heal cycles of dysregulation, disconnection, and disempowerment. Now, whether you are a self-identifying woman or not, as you're listening to this, it doesn't matter because everybody is welcome here to this table that we are facilitating at the Commitment to Growth podcast. And today's conversation is one that I think everybody can take something away from. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're not new, welcome back. As you're listening to this is dropping in June of 2024. And you may or may not know that here on the podcast, we are celebrating authenticity and authentic expression here in June in light of Pride Month as we're recording this, and we will be facilitating more conversations around that this month. I had a beautiful conversation with Sheena Yapchan last week around using our voice as our power, so I highly recommend that you go give that a listen if you haven't already. And today's esteemed guest and I had a really vulnerable chat that I am super duper excited to share with you today. Let me tell you about who is on the podcast today, who you're listening to, and who you're going to gain some really valuable insights from. I have Fede Vargas joining me today on the Commitment to Growth podcast. Now, I met Fede at the Podcast Movement conference in Los Angeles in March of this year. So if you haven't been here before and you don't know the story, I took a spontaneous trip to Los Angeles this year when I came across this event that is meant to connect podcasters with one another and to really immerse podcasters in about a 3-day experience full of just talks and seminars and presentations around what's going on in the podcast industry and how to optimize your podcast. And one of the things that came out of that for me is that if you're watching on YouTube, then you've got the direct testimony, but I also added YouTube podcasting to my repertoire of how I'm showing up on this platform. So video and audio is now available for the Commitment to Growth podcast. And on orientation day of this really special event, Fede was actually leading the orientation along with 2 other podcasters who had previously attended this event 1 year before. And he came down to where I was sitting in the middle of the orientation presentation and used my account as a demo. And then he started telling his story of who he was and how he got into doing what he was doing, that he was born in Mexico, as some of you may know, so was I. And I went up to him after the orientation. I was like, hey, you and I need to sit down for a conversation as soon as possible. And this is what we came up with. So you will notice that a few times in this conversation, Mental Health Awareness Month is referenced because this was recorded in May of this year. When it was originally supposed to air, it's when it aired on Fede's podcast. But I actually chose to move it to June because not only of the theme of this month, authenticity, but because I really think that this podcast shed so much light on our individual experiences as children of immigrants into finding our authenticity and stepping into and embracing our authentic essence as being children from a place that isn't always celebrated, isn't always looked at in a positive light here in Canada, in a predominantly white patriarchal country. And there's much more to that we will get into in this conversation, but I just really think that not only is this conversation such a testament to stepping into your authentic essence, and we both speak on our personal experiences in this conversation, but of course it also beautifully complements Mental Health Awareness Month, because obviously mental health awareness is a conversation that should be 24/7, not just a 1 out of 12 months per year thing. And I think we bridged both worlds really beautifully in this conversation. So let me tell you a little about Fede here. So Fede Vargas is the creator behind My Most Authentic Life, a podcast that explores big changes and unconventional paths. He pivoted from a successful media and entertainment sales career to purpose-driven content creation. Born in Mexico and raised in Canada, Fede offers a global perspective. He's lived in Europe, traveled extensively in Asia Pacific and Latin America, and speaks English and Spanish. Now based in Toronto, Fede graduated from the Audio Podcast Fellowship at Stony Brook University in New York, the Screenwriting Residency at the Canadian Film Centre, and the Creative School of Toronto Metropolitan University. So, human being that is super well versed in storytelling, how to tell engaging stories, how to really bring you into the world of storytelling that we are going to take you through in this conversation. And whether or not you're a child of immigrants or not, I really encourage you to listen and to sit in our shoes a little bit for this conversation, because I think that even if you're not an immigrant or if you are one, this is just a conversation that encourages and incites a lot of empathy and really speaks to how we all walk through the world having a different experience. So we talk about the immigrant experience in how it was for us coming from one country to another and adapting to different social norms, different cultural norms, the impact that that had on our mental health, the impact that that had on our identity, and how we began to create an identity that encompassed these two worlds that we were now finding ourselves living in. So it is a beautiful conversation. I think it's a very impactful conversation that all of us need to have with ourselves and with others every once in a while, if not regularly. And I'm just excited too, because I got to share a lot of my personal experience. So more than just a guest interview, this is really a dialogue between two people who have had a really similar upbringing and storyline. So grab your notebooks, be present with us, hold our hand throughout this conversation, and let's get on to this chat with Fede Vargas. Thank you for being here. Beautiful.
Cool.
All right. We're live.
And we're live.
How are you?
Well, how do we do this? Do we say welcome to the podcast? We're on each other's podcast. This is unique.
We are. I know. It's usually like one person saying welcome to my podcast, but we're doing a little joint project here. So yeah, let's welcome them onto both shows. Welcome to this joint episode of the Commitment to Growth podcast and My Most Authentic Life with Fede and Mariana. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Hello to your audience. And I am a little bit under the weather today. So if I sound a little strange, but nothing would stop me from recording.
Yeah.
But it does strike up a good point, though, about how do we take care of ourselves, right? And still kind of show up to everything that we do.
Yes, 100%. There's a very unwavering commitment among podcast hosts. Like, I can't even describe the amount of people I've also interviewed that are like, oh, I'm like have a stomach ache, but I'll push through for this conversation. We show up for the important chats, which I love. But we're talking a lot about taking care of ourselves in this conversation as well.
Yes. And especially with this being Mental Health Awareness Month, as we're recording this, the topic of self-care is so important, right? So how do you use self-care?
How do I self-care? I have an interesting relationship with that word because I feel like it's my mind instantly goes to bubble baths and wine and maybe what we're commercially told is self-care, like retail therapy, which 100% that can be a part of it. But I really think it's about a lot of times it's about doing the harder thing in an effort to honor my needs, because I'm super prone to like staying on my laptop and working for way more hours than I should. And sometimes that self-care is like, shut the laptop. The other day, for example, I like forced myself to go for a walk just to breathe. And it's really about like putting it in your schedule, I think, as far as taking that time for yourself, going for that walk, doing that workout, having that time with friends. It's like looking at your human needs holistically and saying, I kind of have to hit these points so that I can expect something from myself, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about re-energizing.
Yes.
Plugging yourself in so that you can show up 100% to all of your activities.
Exactly. How about you? What's your self-care practice like nowadays?
Yeah, for me, it's about setting boundaries and disconnecting. My morning routine is definitely very important, and especially over the past 2 or 3 months, I've really have gotten into meditation. And so starting the day off with that peace and quiet, grounding myself, collecting my thoughts, tuning into my breathing, it really sets the tone for the rest of the day.
It does. Yeah. I feel like if you start the day with presence, I also do breath work in the morning. You're able to, you know what to shift back into the rest of the day because you know what presence feels like to start the day, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
I love it. Should we tell the audience what we're talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of fleshed out a few ideas to kind of focus the conversation. I think with both of us being immigrants, having dual nationalities, right? Being both Mexican and Canadian, there's some alignment there in terms of our stories and what we're going to share.
Yeah. And I think that's really where we kind of direct the conversation because I know that a lot of themes around Mental Health Awareness Month, especially from children of immigrants, is this idea that that sense of belonging isn't always present or it's harder to find, and finding yourself amidst two maybe directions that are pulling you in different ways it's a tug of war that you're kind of always fighting with internally in some regards. So I think we just want to shed light on that and talk about our own experiences and maybe how we have navigated that so that people can hopefully resonate and find tools for themselves as well.
Yes. And of course, with authenticity being the backbone of my podcast, we're going to be speaking about authentic expression. And these ideas are all kind of interconnected, right? One theme it can be stacked with the other in a lot of ways. And the merging of two cultures.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about what growing up with those two worlds has been like for you and how you found your authentic voice in that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Well, one expression that has been coming up a lot on the podcast is the idea of neither here nor there. There's an expression in Spanish, ni de aquí ni de allá, which is used in the Latin community for those that either whose families went to the U.S. or to Canada or whatever country they went to. That you're not really, sometimes in my case, having come to Canada, I'm not Canadian enough, but then I'm not Mexican enough. So it's living in that in-betweenness.
What do those conversations look like for you? Is it people pointing out like, oh, but you're not Canadian? Or what does that dialogue look like and what has that done on this journey for you?
Yes, well, this was like early on, way back when I was just like a teenager, right? But that's kind of been part of my experience. As I've evolved into my most authentic version, and our most authentic version is always changing, right?
Yes.
I don't worry about that as much, but it is an interesting part of my upbringing where, when I was backpacking in Europe as a teenager, you'd go to X country and you'd be like, oh, where are you from? And you say, well, I'm Canadian, but you don't look Canadian, right?
Yeah.
And here in Canada, sometimes you say, what country your family is from. So if I would say Mexican, oh, your English sounds amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know one I get a lot is, oh, but you don't have an accent, or oh, you speak really good English, or
Yeah.
my mom like I said, she's of Cuban descent, but she was born and raised in Mexico City. She gets a lot that she'll say, I'm Mexican, and people are like, well, you don't look Mexican. And she's like, well, this was really funny. She recently answered back to somebody. She was like, what do Mexican people look like? And then that person had no answer for her. So I just think it goes to show that you're, even outside of your home country with your ancestral roots, you're kind of being pushed to fit a certain identity of what the base culture has of your culture, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And it does put an added pressure on the container, right? And on our mental health container. too.
100%. Yeah, that journey towards authenticity is kind of swayed in certain directions, because you're like, well, if I'm going to exist here while honoring my home culture, I have to show up in some way that people are expecting that represents my home culture, but that's not the case at all. So it's finding that your authenticity within that, I think.
Yeah. This is a very good point. It came up on a recent episode. This idea of fitting in versus belonging, right?
Yeah, I talked about that on an episode on like my last episode as well, how fitting in is actually the opposite of belonging, because belonging is rooted in people accepting you and seeing you in your authentic expression, versus fitting in is molding yourself to appease, essentially.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So tell us more about your journey then.
Yeah. So I came to Canada when I was just short of turning 6 years old with my parents and my sister. And it was certainly, I remember even at 6 years old being like having that kind of cultural shock of community feels different, family feels different. I think that was kind of the biggest thing. In Mexico, we're very used to building our lives and our schedules around family and friends, and having that kind of be the bulk of the priority, at least in my case when I was home and when I continued to visit. But here in Canada, in Vancouver, I found there was a lot more of that kind of live to work culture, and that sense of community was very different within schools, within friend groups. So I remember I got in trouble in like my first couple weeks of elementary school, because I would greet my friends with a kiss on the cheek, because in Mexico that's what we do to greet our loved ones, right? And some of my friends' parents saw that and like complained to the teacher, and then the teacher told my mom. She was like, she can't be doing that, like that's an invasion of personal space. And I remember that set such a tone for how I related to people, and how I kind of let myself show that kind of warm-hearted, cuddly, like warm side of me, because I was like, that's shunned upon here. Like you can't be that, you can't do that and expect to be accepted. So I remember that just kind of setting a tone for a lot of my upbringing after that, because I was always walking on eggshells. Like I had to measure, is this okay? Is this not okay? And so I stayed small for a long time. And that's where a lot of that kind of internal battle was happening of, am I from here? Am I from there? Like, where is my identity? You know? So,
That's so interesting that you describe it as staying small. Can you elaborate on that? That's a really powerful way of describing it.
Yeah, I think it was, what I'm trying to get at with that is you have such a, I remember like feeling such a desire as a young girl to like express myself in a certain way and be warm and be social and bouncy and fun, because that's what I grew up seeing, what I grew up being mirrored by my relatives, right? But you silence that, you kind of keep that hidden, because you don't know how it's going to be received, you don't know how it's going to be, if it's going to be accepted, and what that's going to do for your sense of belonging, your sense of community. So it was really like that kind of inner voice was hidden inside me for a long time. And it wasn't until I got into I would say even my 20s and college, where I really kind of started giving that voice the mic and saying, hey, it's okay, like let's explore this, let's try to be more authentic in this expression, because it starts to weigh on you that you're not showing up 100% as you'd want to or desire to.
I love that. Describing actions as that inner voice, right? It's not necessarily the act of singing, but what I'm hearing there is inner voice as a sign of expression, right?
Yes. Yeah, just a sign of your identity, your values that are peeking through, but or they're knocking at you like, hey, this is the path you want to walk, but you're swaying to the side to stay with the group. It's okay if you if you explore a different side of the woods, you know?
At the crossroads.
Exactly. Exactly. What was that like for you? Like, what was your catalyst into your authentic expression, or maybe realizing that you were swaying from it a little bit?
Wow, that's a very big question. That's why I think I'm going to be having the podcast forever. I keep joking, but
Yeah.
in a way I will be, because my most authentic life, all of our own authentic lives are, they're ever evolving, right? But I would say, yeah, that, like I said, that's like a multi-part episode. But in a nutshell, I think I would say probably my coming out story would be like the first, like true authentic kind of struggle, right? First coming to terms with that, I was in my late teens and finally came out to my parents when I was 21. And that was the most courageous act I have done in my life. It came with its challenges. I think overall I feel fortunate that I had a quote unquote normal coming out experience, if you want to call it that. We're always kind of it came with its own layers that I'm still kind of dealing with, but that I dealt with. So it wasn't easy, right? But now you hear a lot of unfortunate stories now, right? In present day. So that's tough for people. That was the first one. But then the most recent one, because like I said, we're always coming out into new authentic versions of ourselves, right? Was this kind of life reversal from working a long career in corporate and in sales to now having a podcast and carving this new career.
So
that's a new coming out, a second coming out.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't really thought about it that way. But even like with what I just told, that kind of keeping your voice small, this is the coming out. It's like letting that side of you be heard and seen for what it is, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. How many versions? What's your version of coming out? Because regardless of orientation, we're always coming out into new versions. So what's your latest version?
Latest coming out? I think business has been a very interesting journey. And a lot of people will tell you that it's a very spiritual journey. And I've learned that for me, that has meant learning to manage, or learning to hold your confidence in what you can deliver to people. In my case, I'm a resilience coach for women, right? So women rely on me to kind of come in and help them build resilient lifestyles and mindsets and habits and all of that beautiful stuff. And learning to stand in that mission and confidently in how I can serve the world without feeling like it's arrogant or cocky to stand in that, and how are you communicating your value, and how are you standing in the truth of the change you can create. I think with that kind of keeping small, that habit of like always holding back and always saying a little bit less to play it safe, always feeling a little bit less to buffer my human experience, has been such a theme of the person I've been. And learning now to be in a place where you have to build an image for yourself by communicating your worth and communicating your value. That's been really, I think that's been my coming out story, is really saying it. You can have your voice deserves to be heard. Your voice deserves to be amplified, and learning to kind of shed that old version of myself that thought she couldn't do that.
Amazing. So what are ways that you're amplifying your voice?
I think
besides this podcast, obviously.
Absolutely. It's great sitting in front of the camera and doing that by myself. It's a beautiful question. I think it's been baby steps, because as I'm sure you're somebody who's well versed in self-improvement. When you're transforming yourself, it's about kind of breaking through different ceilings, right? It's about raising your upper limit of positivity, of confidence, of the things that you allow into your life. So I think it really has been about arriving at each new starting line, knowing that there's already been transcendence, there's already been growth from the previous journey, and integrating all of that into understanding that you're going to be tempted to shift into, or I'm going to be tempted to shift into old patterns of staying small. But it's about baby steps, right? Can you say this a bit more assertively? Can you, the next time a person asks you what you do at a networking event, can you really communicate your why and your passion through the message you send them, right? So I think it's really been about accepting that it's going to be in small steps, but it's the small courageous steps that amount to big transformation. And really that merging of cultures, I think, that we're kind of talking about here, right? Not when you finally give that inner voice, that inner identity, the chance to speak and to express itself, you kind of enter a different world, like ni de aquí ni de allá, neither from here nor from there, but somewhere you kind of find your place in between, almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's been really beautiful, on learning how to bring that into who I am, and therefore how I show up as not just an entrepreneur, but a friend, a sister, a daughter, and creating my world around that authentic expression.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that.
Thank you. How about you? What's your authentic expression like nowadays, or how are you bridging your cultures together?
Yeah. As you were saying that about ni de aquí ni de allá, neither here nor there, and the imagery that paints, right? The visualization of this in-betweenness, what I discuss a lot in the podcast through the guest stories, what they share is the beauty of embracing life's messy first draft. And for me, that in-betweenness of being neither here nor there is life's messy first draft. And we never get to that perfect script, right?
Oh my gosh.
The script never gets written. So once you embrace that it's going to be messy and dirty and not perfect, then it just makes it easier every day.
Yeah. Have you seen the movie About Time?
No, I haven't.
Rachel McAdams, and it's a British movie, I believe, but it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And basically, for those that don't know, in this movie, the main actor, who I honestly don't know his name, but the story goes that the men in his family, like the sons and the dads, have the ability to travel back in time. So throughout the movie, anytime something really good happens and he wants to live it again, or he makes like a big mistake, he'll go back in time and correct it. So every second iteration of the events that he relives are these like no mistakes, like nothing ever happened kind of thing. And at the end of the movie, his father is about to pass away and shares a secret with him. And the secret is that even amidst this like incredible power that I'm sure many of us can say we'd kind of want, the power really isn't about using it all the time. It's actually about learning to live without it, knowing that you have it. So living every single day like it was the first and only time that you're ever going to live it. So at the end of the movie, he actually goes through a while where he like repeats every single day, even when a good day, bad day, so that he kind of takes in everything that he didn't notice the first time. But at the end of the movie, he says, you know what? I'm taking it a step further and just not time traveling at all, because every day is as it should be. There shouldn't be the temptation
have I not seen this? That's amazing.
Oh my gosh,
I love this.
Netflix. It's called About Time. Do it.
Okay. Is it recent?
Heart-lifting. No, it's a couple years old. I want to say like 2018 or 19, maybe even before that.
As you're describing the plot sounds so familiar. So maybe I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It's a beautiful movie.
But it also reminds me of another movie, Sliding Doors.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
With Gwyneth Paltrow. Yeah, so there's I mean, not exact same plot, but the idea that one event in life can steer you in different directions, right? Because at the beginning of the movie, there's an inciting incident where she misses a train. She bumps into someone and she misses the tube in London.
Okay.
And so there's two parallel stories: one where she doesn't miss a train, and one where she does. And
oh my gosh,
two very different lives happen, but they eventually intersect.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
It's the idea that you're meant to end up where you're meant to end up, and you'll eventually get to where you need to go, even if it's not where you think it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
So that we need to add this too. Yeah, we'll put this in the episode resources, movie recommendations. Hey, maybe we're onto a new show here. Maybe we could do a co-host on a new show.
Exactly. Yeah, movies with personal growth messages. Yes, I love that. I love that. Do we want to talk a little bit about kind of the immigrant child experience and mental health a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, this is a great point because it's actually one that is rarely talked about, right? I mean, that's the beauty about having these conversations year after year and having an entire month dedicated to it, is that as the years go by, you get to have more focused discussions. I do believe that it has to be a year-round conversation, as with anything, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But the spotlight is good. But what are your thoughts about what role the immigrant experience plays on mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think even insofar as what comes with being an immigrant, right? For a lot of people, a lot of maybe the firstborn children, right? There's a lot of talk around firstborn immigrant daughters or firstborn immigrant sons. Like, they had to take on maybe the father or mother figure in some regard because parents weren't around. They had to work a ton. That kind of expectation, that mediator role being placed upon them, while also managing that kind of new formation of identity. Do I assimilate? Do I keep some things, ditch other things? Just finding your belonging amidst having switched into a completely new culture can take a big toll. I know I resonate with a lot of that, particularly that sense of identity that I feel like I was missing for a long time. You're kind of walking a little bit directionless because you're like, well, who do I associate with, or what values do I have that I want to carry with me, that I want to bring into interactions, into relationships, how I show up in general. And that can bring a lot of anxiety. That can lead into even depression, right? Because without that kind of meaningful, deep connection to people where you see yourself and your experiences mirrored in them, that sense of lack, of not being seen, of not being recognized is huge and takes a toll. So I just want to shed light on that. If anybody who's listening can resonate and having that feeling of not quite belonging, but not quite not belonging either, or just having that pressure of, I have to be there for my family, I have to meet these expectations, I have to be the mediator, the caretaker. It's such a felt experience, and it deserves to be seen and heard and honored.
That's right. Yeah, that's a very, very good point, because you take on these roles sometimes at a young age, right? Yeah, and the pressures that come with it.
Yeah, 100%. I know something that really helped me is I kind of had my catalyst of, this voice needs to be heard, she needs to express herself. I sought counseling, particularly from a counselor that uses a decolonization and intersectional approach to mental health. So what that means, for those that don't know, is my counselor, she kind of looks back at your ancestral roots and really looks at patterns of being. So for example, imposter syndrome, turns out, I learned through her, is quite a it's a term very rooted in decolonization, because it's the idea that you don't belong here, you're imposing something, right? And that's a huge theme in colonization, is you're you suddenly don't think you belong, or you think people are going to find out that you're not confident, not successful, because there is this idea of like somebody else, of a higher figure, higher social order imposing on you. So she really looks at, okay, well, understand how these patterns come from colonialism, from patriarchal
Yeah.
ideologies, right? And really kind of tearing that down to get you back into your ancestral roots and your cultural expression. She's been a big journey in that for me, I know. So for those of you that are looking for that additional support, I highly recommend that decolonizational approach to mental health. Mm-hmm.
So it was decolonizing. What was the full name of it?
I don't know if this is quite the name of the practice, but it's decolonizing therapy and intersectional approaches to cognitive behavioral therapy or just mental health in general.
I love this. I love this so much because a big part of my practice, daily practice, when I was on my career break and I was really focused on personal development, was all the powerful R's. I love the R's because I think it speaks to what you were saying. Rewiring, reassessing, re-examining,
Yes.
right? Just kind of, and that speaks to all of these shoulds that we've been programmed with, and just questioning them, giving yourself the freedom to, what if this isn't the right way for me, right?
That on its own is like one of the most liberating things you can do. It's not always comfortable to ask why, but it's such a necessary aspect. And I think we fear so much straying from the norm, straying from the group and taking our own path, right? But in so many ways, it's the most self-honoring thing we can do, to question what you're being told, what you're being told you should do, should act, should say, and instead write your own formula for how you want your story to mean and play out. And
if you come back to the same answer, then fine, right? Or maybe there's an in-between.
Yes,
a compromise.
Exactly. But as you said, our authentic self is always changing too, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I have to ask you here. It's funny. I don't ask every guest on the podcast because, I mean, even though that's what it's called, my most authentic life, but it's the bedrock. What is authenticity to
you? What is authenticity to me? I know one conversation that has come up a lot on my guest interviews too is this idea of the human experience is a both and experience. So you can be sad throughout a chapter of your life while holding hope and joy. You can be angry about an outcome of something while holding joy and perseverance and hope on the other, right? So I think authenticity for me has been, I'm somebody that feels very deeply, and I often kind of retreat back into that inner world of like feeling a lot and extracting everything and pulling everything apart. And I know that's something that I used to be very insecure about, because people would be like, oh, you're so melancholy, like you think so much, get out of your head, you know? And I think it's really been about right now where my authentic self is evolving, is knowing that without those parts of me, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't be able to give the world what I give the world now. So knowing that all those parts exist because they have a purpose, and I'm the one that gets to give them meaning as far as how they contribute to my life, my relationships, my professional work, has been just a very liberating and kind of inner child honoring way of bringing those parts of me into my daily experience and my relationships. So that's where I'm at.
Amazing. Yeah. I
Thank
love
you for
that
the
answer
question.
because everybody has a unique answer. And that's that's the beauty of authenticity.
Where are you on your journey to authenticity right now?
Oh, well, I'm in one of the best versions of it, but to your point, it keeps evolving, right? Because it's basically every experience that you have will shape the next version. So I'm proud of where I am right now, for sure. It's definitely one of the most authentic versions, but it's not a perfect version. Like I was saying earlier, life's a messy first draft, right?
Yes.
Sometimes not everything's perfect, and that's okay. And so that I think being okay with that means you can kind of be the closest version, but always open to improvement, right? Always, like I was saying, those strong R's, right? Always be open to reevaluating, reexamining.
Totally.
When
That
you
on
have
its
new
own is
information, right?
authenticity. Yes. That on its own is authenticity. Like the accepting and showing up and holding the truth that you're not perfect and that you're constantly evolving. I think that on its own is a really brave expression of authenticity, to say, hey, I'm a work in progress.
A work in progress. Yes. WIP or WIP.
Exactly.
So I think are we starting to wrap up, I think, right?
I think we are starting to wrap up. Yes. What's one last
I feel
thing
like
you want the
it's been
audience?
such a fast conversation that hopefully, we need to find a way to do these more regularly with different topics.
I agree. Yes, maybe it might be movies, it might be stories about our immigrant experiences, or maybe both. That's fine. We'll let you know.
But maybe one closing thought, at least for my audience, as this will be dropping during Mental Health Awareness Month. What action would you recommend to someone out there as they honor the emotions that come with this month?
One question that I ask myself often when I'm maybe don't have my footing so well, or just kind of holding multiple emotions at once, is I'll just kind of sit down with myself in a quiet spot where I'm away from some noise, and I'll ask myself, what does my soul need right now? And that usually is the most, I'll say not even usually, always is the quickest, easiest path towards what you most authentically need in that moment. Because what you give space for is your deepest expression to express itself and its needs. And from there, that answer is your quickest, and we're not talking about efficiency here, right? I'm just talking about straight lines, but it's your one ticket to standing in your truth and honoring what it needs through the ebbs and flows of the human experience. So
nourishing the soul.
The soul. How about you? What's one tidbit you'd want people to take away?
Wow, yeah, there's I think it's taking time to reflect. I'm talking specifically now about the mental health journey and just taking, that's why it's a whole month of it, right? And it doesn't have to be like, oh, today I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes and no, it's just like taking moments throughout the month to just reflect and let certain things sink in, emotions and reflection.
I love that. Yeah, it's not just a May job. It's a 24/7 job to be taking care of yourself.
Yeah, because the thoughts that you process this month will set the tone for next month and maybe for something you do later in the year.
Exactly. It evolves every authentic version of you. So
yeah,
I love it. Well, Fede, thank you so much for the time and the conversation and the vulnerable shares. I'm sure this is going to resonate with a lot of people who are listening and can resonate to our life experience. How can people find you after this episode?
That's right, because this is dropping on yours and on mine at the same time.
Exactly.
They can go find my most authentic life around the web. It's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube.
He just got on YouTube and he's doing a wonderful job. So
it's a kind of like a beta site. So please give me feedback.
We both just made our debut after podcast movement. So please support.
Yes. Well, this has been amazing, Mariana. Thank you for introducing yourself to my audience, and also likewise, where can people find you?
People can find me over at Commitment to Growth. That is my page on Instagram and TikTok, where I post anything and everything about how to build a resilient life, how to build the habit, mindset, heart, and lifestyle to build a resilient life. And on YouTube as well, I made my debut about a month ago. It's the Commitment to Growth podcast. So if you want more conversations about resilience coaching in a sip, is where you can find them. So that's it.
Beautiful.
I think.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for your time. I will see you in our movie chats very soon.
That's right. That's right.
Have
Movie
a great
podcast
day.
coming up. Bye, guys.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much again for listening to that conversation with Fede, everybody. I hope you found it just as impactful and as awe-inspiring and as soul-lifting as it was for me to just stand in my story and tell you about my experiences and really shed light on this identity that myself and Fede have created, and that surely if you are at a time in your life where you are evolving and stepping into different places and different times in your life, you're also adapting to the seasons by adapting who you are and who you are becoming. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for getting vulnerable with us. And remember to check out Fede and his podcast, My Most Authentic Life, because he facilitates some really, really beautiful dialogues on there. Again, if you like this episode, make sure to subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're watching or listening, and send it to a friend who might also find it valuable. And in case you're new here and you haven't heard about Commitment to Growth, my resilience coaching practice, and you want a little bit of an introduction into how I'm redefining resilience and helping anybody that comes across this space understand what resilience really means in their life, I encourage you to go to the link in the podcast description and grab your free copy of my Foundations of a Resilient You workbook. This is my signature workbook where I go into the 6 pillars of resilience that I have created and walk through with clients in my practice. And it gives you some really powerful questions to start understanding where these 6 pillars in your life are unaligned or unbalanced, so that you can start creating a healthy foundation of resilience in your own lifestyle. So head to the show notes to grab your copy of that workbook. It is totally free. It'll land right in your email seconds after you put your email in. And make sure you're following me on Instagram. It's at Commitment to Growth, so that you are updated on podcast episodes that are coming out or just any exciting things that I've got going on there. If you're in the Vancouver, BC area, I have got a whack load of live events happening this summer, from healing circles to hopefully some bigger events happening in rented spaces. So make sure to follow me on there so that you can join us for our healing circles and our sisterhood. It's a really beautiful space. And once again, thank you again for choosing the podcast as your daily source of personal growth and innovation and inspiration. And I will see you in the next conversation. Have a wonderful rest of your day.